welcome back to Mind Your Mission, where we have honest conversations about our design as women and how to encourage one another to stay on course towards what God says is good in His Word. We're so glad you're joining us today. Liz, you're recovering from surgery. How's it going? How does your hip feel? How are you doing?
Overall, my hip feels pretty good. I was surprisingly not in as much pain as I thought I was going to be in. Per Reddit and the internet, I thought I was going to be in a lot more pain than I am. But my hip, like the first day after surgery, like right when I woke up, it was pretty painful. But after that, I really have not had really any pain. I'm on crutches, so I don't use it very much, but overall, pretty good. The worst part has just been like my body hasn't been feeling great. This is the first time I've like gotten ready. I just brushed my hair. I did brush it a few days ago because it was matte. It was so bad, just from laying around. But I just haven't felt great. Like my body, my stomach has just not, from all the medication, I think, and I haven't really been able to eat very much just because I'm feeling nauseous. So we're powering through, and I'm excited to get through this episode and chat with you guys today.
Well, I'm happy that you're on the road to recovery, that, every day hopefully gets a little bit better, and I'll be praying for you in that. But it's Valentine's Day week, y'all. So we thought it would be fun to kind of have a Valentine's Day themed episode. But Liz, your birthday is on Valentine's Day. What is it like to share a birthday with Valentine's Day?
I feel like growing up, it was always so sad because I'd want to do something for my birthday. And I wasn't in a relationship, but my friends would be in a relationship. So I wouldn't be able to do anything with them because they would be hanging out with their significant others. So that kind of stunk in high school. But since like getting married or dating Matt and stuff, we've always just kind of celebrated my birthday, and we don't really celebrate Valentine's Day. So we kind of just celebrate my birthday, and it's extra special because I'll get Valentine's gifts and birthday gifts. But yeah, growing up it was sad, but now I don't really care. We just decide not to do much with it.
Good. Yeah, it's funny how like when you're a kid, things like holidays and birthdays seem like so much of a big deal, but then how that just kind of like fades. It doesn't get less special, but just less, I don't know, there's less pressure associated with it, I guess. But Valentine's Day for me has always been one of those favorite holidays, actually. And it's funny because other than my now husband, I don't know that I ever actually had a boyfriend on Valentine's Day, just like the way that it worked out. At least I don't remember one, which I guess is good. But what I do remember and what made it so special for me was actually my mom and how she like did Valentine's Day for us. Like she would always make us a really special breakfast with like heart-shaped bowls for cereal and like chocolate milk and chocolate covered strawberries. Like she always would get us a little gift. And even when I was at the academy, like she would send me a box of stuff and just made it super special. And so as I got older, that sense of love and celebration that she did for us kind of translated into me wanting to make my friends feel special on Valentine's Day too. So even though I never had a boyfriend like on Valentine's Day, or even if I did, like it was always about just celebrating love and my friends and family. So I really am grateful that my mom treated it that way. And now that I've come to realize the ultimate love, the love of our God who is love, I've realized that's worth celebrating every day. And so it doesn't matter if you're in a romantic relationship or not. Like you've got a God who loves you unconditionally. And I want to remind you all of that today and every day. So anyway, today we thought that it would be fun to give you our 10 best pieces of relationship advice, how to mind your mission in relationships, if you will. So Liz, do you want to kick us off with your number one advice? We'll just kind of go back and forth.
Yes, I will. I didn't really number them as like, this one's my best piece of advice, but I'll just go down for the first one I have written down. But my first one was keeping God at the center of your relationship begins with making him the center of your life. Because I feel like a lot of people will say, yeah, make sure God's at the center of your relationship. And I've always kind of been like, well, how do I do that? Yeah. But it's kind of this heart posture of putting him first in everything. Matthew 6:33 reminds us to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So this verse reminds us that when we prioritize our relationship with God, everything else, including all of our earthly relationships, will align with his plan. So it all starts in that secret place where you get to intentionally seek God in prayer and worship in his word. And I can attest that my marriage is a lot better when I am doing that and intentionally seeking God. And so as you grow closer to God, you're going to reflect his love and his grace and his patience that you need for a healthy relationship. And he'll be the foundation of your relationship. And so when challenges come, which they definitely will, especially I know the past week, Matt has been taking care of me, and it's not been the easiest thing because he's at work and he's tired. He's been doing such a good job of making sure that I'm okay. But you're going to have challenges in marriage and in your relationships. And when your foundation is Christ and you saw him in the secret place, it makes your relationship a lot easier and it makes it centered around Christ. So, all in all, in order to center your relationship around Christ, you first have to have Christ be the center of your life, or it's not going to work. You can't just have him in the center of your relationship without him being the center of your life. He has to be everything.
That's definitely great advice to start with. And one thing that I always tell my friends who are engaged, or I think I write it in a lot of people's wedding cards, I write that I used to get upset when people would tell me that marriage is hard because yeah, I know marriage is hard, but I also want to hear about the good parts. But once I entered marriage, I realized that marriage is hard, not so much because of the other person, what they do, how they make you upset or anything. But to me, marriage has been hard because of the sin that it reveals in my own life. Marriage has been a mirror to help reveal some of my selfishness and some other ways that I've sinned. But putting God first allows you to lean into that and let it change you versus just sitting in that. So that's a really good first piece of advice to start with. My piece of advice, first one that I have, is be the person you're looking for is looking for. And if you've never heard that advice, I'll say it again. Be the person you're looking for is looking for. I promise it makes sense. So I put this one first because although it's still applicable for when you're in a relationship, it's even more important, kind of like Liz's first piece of advice, before you start dating in the first place. When I first heard this advice, it really made me think about how I was using singleness and whether or not I was using it to prepare me to confidently enter a godly relationship that could lead me towards marriage or not. In high school and in the first few years of college, I spent so much time dreaming about my future husband and not enough time minding my business. And I think that we should all use our time of singleness to grow in a relationship with God, to deepen your character, to make sure that you're ready for a God-honoring relationship. And you're not looking for perfection in this area, but you are looking for a heart that's surrendered and prepared. And I think that this is what people are kind of talking about when they say, oh yeah, I met my future husband when I finally fully surrendered. I think that when people shift the focus off of their dream guy and more on just being the person that they want to be in a relationship moving forward, that they want the qualities that they want someone to see in them, when they start working on those and just their relationship with God, this pairs really well with Liz's advice, that's when they finally end up meeting the person because the person that they're looking for is finally attracted to that. So that is my first piece of advice.
Yeah, that's so good. I've heard that before. And I think it goes along with this idea that also be involved in the places you would want your future spouse to be involved in. You probably won't find who you're looking for at a bar or at a club or at a party, but you could find them in church doing ministry together. So I think it's important to become the one that you're looking for, like Erin said.
And a verse that kind of goes along with this and along with Liz's advice is Psalm 86:11. And it says, teach me your way, Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart that I may fear your name. And in my season of singleness, before I finally got with my now husband, the undivided heart piece really is what I prayed on. I prayed this verse every single day, Lord, give me an undivided heart. Because once I realized that when you enter a relationship, it's not like your heart goes 50-50, God and your husband, your heart is always 100% God. And then your husband also somehow gets the overflow that other 100%, somehow God makes that work because the love is from him. So that's Psalm 86:11 is a verse that I totally recommend praying in your single season.
That's so true, because I feel like in earlier relationships before my marriage, I was so infatuated with the other person and putting them above God, and it didn't work. But once I started kind of seeing God as the center of my life and going along with that verse, I feel like it all worked out, and we're married now. So it obviously worked out. But my next piece of advice is the one doesn't exist. And I heard this from Jonathan Bacluda. I think he talks about it in his book Outdated, which is good. If you're dating, I recommend that book. But this idea of the one is the idea that there's some perfect person who is created just for us. And it sounds romantic, but I don't think it aligns with how God calls us to approach relationships. Instead of spending all your time and energy and worrying about if you found the one, focus on someone who shares your values and your faith and is committed into growing their relationship with God. Because a godly relationship isn't about finding someone who is flawless or destined for you, but it's about choosing someone who Christ is the center of their life. Marriage is about a covenant. It's not about perfection. And your significant other becomes the one when you get married and you commit to each other in marriage. Marriage is a covenant. It's a choice to love, to grow, and to put God at the center of your relationship every single day. So instead of chasing this fairy tale that you see in movies, seek someone who is chasing after God, because then you can build a relationship that reflects His love and purpose for your life, and trust that His plan is better than any idea of the one that we could create in our heads.
That is totally true advice. And once you let go of that picture perfect version of who you think you're going to be with one day and what your relationship is going to look like, it makes things a lot more practical, and it's a way to let God lead. So I totally am standing by that advice. So the second piece of advice that I have, so number 4 on our list, is build your relationship in the company of others. So the best way to really get to know someone is in a group setting. Pay attention to how they treat others, to how they interact in different environments, and with who they surround themselves with. This helps you see the real person, not just the side that they want to show you in one-on-one situations. This is also so great and such a practical tip for accountability. Surround yourself with a strong community of trusted people who can offer wisdom and perspective and call you out if you're not being the real you. And when you're surrounded by friends who genuinely care, they'll keep you grounded. They'll be the ones to call you out if you're being fake, or if you're being caught up in infatuation with someone who isn't the right fit for you. And this accountability extends beyond emotional support with like physical boundaries as well. Hebrews 10:24-25. Well, actually, I'm going to read 23 too, because it's good. It says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir one another up to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." So this is just a really good verse that talks about why it's important to meet with other believers, to have someone to pick you up. And I also was thinking, to go along with this advice, like one practical thing, ask your mom what she thinks. Like, I know that this is kind of funny, but seriously, infatuation is blinding. And someone like your mom, someone like a friend, someone like a pastor, genuinely has your best interest in mind, and they'll be able to see if something is good for you or not. Or ask someone who knows you, like, is this person like actually, do you think we're compatible? Like, if your mom and I'm saying this advice, having learned from experience. Like, if your mom is uneasy about it, and like she's like not saying like don't be in the relationship, but definitely not like for the relationship. Like, your mom's gonna love you and want to support you, but pay attention to her radar, because usually the mom radar is pretty good. And then one other verse to go along with this is Ecclesiastes 4:9-12, and it says, "Two are better than one, because they have good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift them up, but woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up." So another thing with this, like, if you only have the person that you're dating to rely on for validation and support, so if you haven't built that community, that support system around you, then you may find it really hard to let them go, even if they're not the right fit for your future. So that's why it's so important to establish a strong community first, people who can give you wise counsel and help you see things clearly and be there for you if the relationship does end, so that you're not hanging on just purely out of desperation.
Yeah, that's so true. And if your significant other is your only friend when that does end, if it ends, then you have nobody around you anymore because you gave all that up to be in a relationship. And I feel like that happens a lot in college, high school, and then you're alone because that one person that you relied on for everything is gone. But I love that piece of advice, ask your mom. And in college, it was harder because when we were dating our significant others, I saw my parents like once or twice a year. So I really relied on like my Christian community there. But I think when you date in isolation, that's when you invite sin in because you don't have anyone holding you accountable, like you said. So I really like that point that you made. I think relationships are meant to be lived out in community, even in marriage. Like,
well, and it's funny because I asked ChatGPT as I was preparing for this episode. I asked ChatGPT, I asked, what is courting? Because like when my husband and I started dating, when we first sat down and like had serious discussions about dating, I kind of framed it like, hey, I know courting seems super outdated, but I kind of want to model that desire because courting, per ChatGPT, is an old-fashioned term for the process of pursuing a romantic relationship, typically with the intent of eventual marriage or a serious commitment, and involves getting to know someone in a respectful, often formal way where both individuals might take time to build a bond before becoming intimate or officially dating. In historical contexts, courting often included practices like chaperone visits, thoughtful gestures, and sometimes even the approval of families. It was more structured and deliberate than casual dating, emphasizing long-term intentions and mutual respect. So I just have to say, like, what about this definition wouldn't someone want? Like, to have long-term intention and mutual respect, like if those kind of things outlined, the chaperone visits, like that seems formal, but like if those things foster intentionality and respect, then like why would you not want those boundaries, if you will?
Matt and I called it when we were dating or whatever, we called it evaluating. That's we called it 'cause we're like, we're evaluating each other for marriage. But did you and Nolan have like chaperones on every date you went on at the academy? That's something I feel like it's hard to do sometimes. I don't know when you're
Kind of. I mean, if we did go on a date, just the two of us, we made sure it was in a public place. And I think that the spot you have to be really careful of is the car. Like that is the spot. Because that was the one place where we didn't have people around us. Like at the academy, obviously, there are people in and at a restaurant or wherever we went. We made sure that there were people, but in the car in between, like even that is a temptation spot. So just make sure that you're really pinpointing those spots of potential weakness. Because in the moment, I'll say in the planning of a date, like you don't think that those moments are going to cause temptation, but it's when you get infatuated, when the biology takes over, that things can get kind of tough. So I just encourage you to be wise beforehand, set up boundaries that are way in front of the boundary line, if you will, so that you're honoring the Lord with your relationship.
so true. My next advice is comparison is the thief of joy because I feel like social media makes it so easy to fall into this trap in relationships. Like with every scroll, we're bombarded with these picture perfect highlights of everyone's life, and it makes relationships seem effortless and romantic and kind of flawless. But we often forget that these are curated moments. They're not the full picture or the full story. So instead of comparing ourselves in our relationship to these images that we see online, let's shift our focus to God's word and what he says about who a godly man is rather than Instagram. Because the world standards are wealth and looks and grand romantic gestures, but those are fleeting and superficial. God calls us to a higher standard because in Ephesians 5:25, we're reminded of what true love looks like. And it says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So a godly man loves sacrificially with humility and servant-heartedness. So those are good things to look for in somebody. And similarly, 1 Timothy 6:11 encourages men to pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. And so these are qualities that we should be striving for in our relationship rather than looking to Instagram of what our guy should look like, what height he should be, and all that stuff. Because when we stop comparing our relationship to these social media posts and measure it against the truth of Scripture, we can get a clear perspective because God's word offers timeless wisdom for what matters in a partner and relationship. So You can ask yourself if your significant other strives to love like Christ. Is he pursuing godliness, growing in faith? Because these are qualities that build a strong Christ-centered relationship that no Instagram highlight reel can compare to.
Yes, this is such great advice. And sometimes I get frustrated when I like go through my camera roll and don't have cute aesthetic pictures of either me and my husband or my family or even just me. But then I like stop and think about the process that it would be to get those pictures. Like, not only would I have to like make sure that I look perfect, but we'd have to take like a billion photos. We'd have to stop. It would be fake. And that's not the priority when you're dating. Like, yeah, pictures are fun, but that's just not the priority. So great advice, Liz. My next piece of advice, so number 6, is see them for who they are, not for who you hope they'll become. So, like Liz said, dating is an evaluation process. Don't ignore the red flags and don't stay in a relationship hoping that somebody will change. You're looking for somebody who already reflects the qualities that you're seeking in a future spouse, not someone that you'll have to fix or wait on. If they're not meeting your standards now, that's important information. And if you convince yourself that you can change them and that they could be such a godly man one day, then you're just setting yourself up for failure. This is another piece of advice that is coming from personal experience. Like, I'm someone who would get in a relationship and almost go for quantity of time over quality of time. Like, I think in high school, especially, I saw a long-term relationship as a successful one, just because the people that were older than me and had like been dating for a year or 2 years, like I respected their relationship and I thought it must be perfect. And so when I got in one, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to get in a relationship, it has to last a long time, which is just such bad wisdom. Like, dating is not for the sake of like dating for 2 years. Like, if you'd rather not waste your time and not waste another person's time if you decide you're not a good fit for one another. Like, they could be a good godly person, but you're still just not compatible. Just don't waste your time. Don't waste their time. And another thing, you're not married yet. If you're just dating, like, this is another thing I would get caught up in, like convincing myself that I had to stay with them in order to be a faithful person. But like, you're not married. Like, the purpose of dating is evaluation, and it's okay if you take a step back, even if you're not exiting a relationship. Like, take a step back. Like, I think we need to bring back the concept of like just going on dates before dating. Seems crazy, but I think we need to bring it back.
Yeah, because I think we make relationships so much more serious than they need to be. So I am all for just going on dates and seeing if you like the person. And the more time you spend in a relationship, isn't leading to marriage, is less time you get to find your future husband. So I think it's so important to take the process seriously, but if it's not working, don't be afraid to end it. And last week, someone had asked me, like, how did you know Matt was the one? And I had to think about it for a second. But my answer was, I knew Matt was someone who could lead me spiritually and was going to be a great father to our future kids. So look for that in a relationship. Don't look at someone who has the potential to be that. You need to find someone who is there right now, because their progression isn't promised. My next piece of advice is that love isn't a feeling, it's a choice. So that initial excitement and infatuation, it's going to fade. And sometimes that can feel like the foundation of true love, but true love goes beyond fleeting emotions. It's about making a daily intentional commitment to your partner, choosing to love them through every high and low and challenge. And this piece of advice goes more so for marriage, because in dating, like Erin said, you don't want to stay in a relationship too long if it's not the person. But in marriage, you're making a choice and you're entering into a covenant with Christ, and you're choosing to love that person. And so marriage isn't just a relationship, it's a covenant, which is a sacred promise between you and your spouse and God. And in this covenant, you're committing to love each other unconditionally, no matter the circumstances. And Mark 10:9 says, therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. So this isn't about convenience or feelings. It's about steadfast faithfulness. And I think it's something important to talk about before you consider getting married, because you need to make sure that you have this mindset going into marriage, because there's going to be moments where it's difficult to love your spouse, and choosing to act in love through patience and kindness and forgiveness and sacrifice reflects the way that Christ loves us. And Ephesians 4:2 says, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. So when love is rooted in this kind of commitment, it has the power to weather any storm and grow stronger throughout the difficulties of life. So as you decide if you want to step into marriage or continue to grow your relationship to that step, love isn't always about feeling in love. And I think that's something I had to learn through relationships, because sometimes I get scared, like, oh, I'm not feeling in love right now. Is this not the person for me? But I had to look back and say, is this a character flaw, which is important to determine in dating? Like, is this an issue with their relationship with God? Are they not where they need to be? Or is it a me issue? Is it like a comparison issue where I'm comparing my relationship in what I thought I was going to have versus what I have? You just have to see where the root of those feelings are coming from. And if it isn't a character issue and it's a you issue, like realizing that love is a choice and you're not going to feel super infatuated in love with your husband every day, but it's a choice to love them. And I think the greatest picture of love is Christ. So look at what he says in his word and put that into practice in your relationship.
Absolutely. And that discernment that you're talking about in a relationship, like trying to decide if you need to power through in a sense and continue loving the person, or if it's something you're not supposed to be in, that's really where the community comes in, because they can tell you, like, yes, you need to choose to love, that this person is a godly person who you just will need to love through their flaws that can be overcome, or if it's something that you should step out of. So again, definitely be in community, because you can rely on them to kind of double check your feelings.
Yeah, that's so true. And Matt and I had a moment in our relationship where I was really struggling because I didn't feel in love. And a lot of it was my fault, because I was super stressed out with school and all military obligations. Like, I was not in a good place at this point in our relationship. And so I was having all these like thoughts, and I was like, I don't have time for a relationship. But one of my friends was, the night I was going to like break up with him, she was like, he's such a great guy. And like, treats you, like, she didn't know I was going to break up with him. She just like said this. And she was like, he serves you so well, and all this good stuff about Matt. And I was like, she's right. Like, this is totally a me problem, and I'm going to miss out on an awesome relationship and a potentially awesome future husband because of my own issues. And I'm surprised he didn't break up with me, because I should have been broken up with, because I was not very nice, really not in a good place. But we talked that night and decided that this was a choice, and we were going to give it a few weeks and try to see if it got better. And it did. I was just like in a really low spot. So that's an instance of when sometimes maybe you don't feel like you should be in the relationship, but it was totally my anxieties, and I was not having a good quiet time with the Lord, and it was all me, and I probably shouldn't have been in a relationship because I was in this really dark, bad place, but the Lord helped me get out of it, and then Matt also helped me get out of it. So it was that was the time in our relationship when we were dating where I was like, oh, love is a choice, and learning that before marriage was so important, because it's helped me a lot. I don't really struggle with any doubts in marriage or anything. Number one, because it's a covenant and it's a forever thing until one of us leaves the earth. But number two, because I realized that you're not always going to feel in love with the person, but it's so important to make that choice.
Definitely. Thank you for that advice, Liz, and for sharing part of your story. So number 8 is know the rules to play the game. And I'll add, play the long game. And this is a saying that I borrowed from my husband. He uses this in a lot of different contexts, but especially when talking to single friends about dating. Because when it comes to a romantic relationship, you need to first understand the dynamics before jumping in. You have to start by knowing what your personal boundaries are and establishing them in relationships, both physically and emotionally. You have to know where the lines are and where your boundaries are way in front of the line so that you don't cross the line. But then you also have to play the game. Dating is an evaluation process, so don't rush in and put all your cards on the table first. Flirt a little bit, get to know each other, but don't put all of your feelings out there right away. If you lead with I like you, if you go up to someone and you're like, hey, I kind of like you, like we should go out sometime, like that kind of forces the other person to make an early decision, and you don't want to rush that. Sometimes I think we take dating way too seriously, and I don't recommend calling someone your boyfriend or girlfriend before you've had a couple solid dates. Like, dating should come before the title of boyfriend or girlfriend. I think we all should go back to that courting process. And also, I added play the long game, because it ties into what Liz is talking about. if you're already in a relationship and things are going well, then start thinking practically about your future. And I want to caveat this with, don't romanticize the idea of marriage or kids. Ask yourself if this is a person that you can see raising children with you. And yeah, seriously, I don't mean romanticizing the future, because I've gotten caught up in that trap before, but I mean practically ask, would they be a strong spiritual partner for the family that you want to build?
That's so true. And when you do romanticize your relationship, that's when it's harder to leave. If you have this image built in your head, like, I'm going to marry this person and have this many kids with this person, it's going to be harder for you to leave, or it's going to be really hard if you get broken up with. And so I think it's so important to have like those boundaries, to not talk about that stuff when you're just dating and not engaged. Like when you're engaged, you can talk about the future and marriage more, but when you're dating, don't talk about it too much, because then your heart kind of gets married to the person. And when it does end, it is very, very hard. I can attest.
Yeah, I think that people get mixed up when the topic of emotional boundaries is brought up, because people don't really ever understand what that tangibly looks like. And exactly what you're saying, like, you can figure out, you can evaluate if you have a shared vision for the future with somebody without talking about specifics, without talking about your dream home on a farm with chickens and 10 kids. Like, you can talk about, I guess I would love children, I want to raise them up in the Lord. Yes. Like, you could talk about, especially one thing that my husband and I talked about, like, what do you see yourself as the woman doing when you have kids? Like, do you plan to keep working? Do you want to be a stay-at-home mom? Like, those are things that you should talk about once you have entered a serious relationship and are working towards engagement. But don't set yourself up for failure. I think that my husband and I'm trying to remember, I'm pretty sure that early on, we decided that we actually didn't want to say I love you until we were sure, or pretty sure, that we were going to get engaged. And so that was just something, like, I knew that I loved him way earlier than I said it, and I was acting that out in how we were having conversations and what we were doing, and the intention and thought that I was putting in. But I didn't get wrapped up in the lovey-dovey aspect of it. Like, we weren't just sitting there saying, "Oh, I love you, I love you." Like, you can tell that someone loves you without saying it every second. And we love saying I love you now, and it's really meaningful now. And when he did say it for the first time, it was actually on Valentine's Day of 2022. Now that I'm thinking about it, it was on Valentine's Day because it was February. We got engaged in March. And when he said, I love you, that was like a sign to me, like, wow, like, we decided not to say this until we were working towards an engagement. That was like a little hint, like, oh, an engagement is actually coming. And I don't know, it was a really cool way to do it. And it kept our emotional discussion at a level that wasn't making us daydream about the future in ways that God didn't necessarily want us to.
I really respect the way you guys pursued your relationship too. I feel like you guys were really wise about it. And
it came after a lot of failed relationships. So I learned my mistakes. And a lot of it is credit to Nolan, because he led us in that way. And he was very intentional in the way he pursued. So that's another thing, like, as a woman, especially a type A woman, let the guy lead. And although you probably have a lot of wisdom to bring and can help establish some of those boundaries, wait and see if he'll bring up those conversations. And because I could tell you a lot about how he's going to be as a future husband and future father one day leading your family.
yeah, you should not be the one initiating all the boundary conversations. The man should take the lead on that, and you should let them take the lead on that, because it shows how they're going to lead your family spiritually, like Erin said. But my last piece of advice is, it's crucial to find your satisfaction in God and not your significant other. Because when we look to our significant other to fulfill our needs and complete us, we place a huge burden on them that they weren't meant to bear, because no human relationship can fill the void that only God was designed to fill. And Psalm 16:11 reminds us, you make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. So this verse shows that true contentment and fulfillment can only come from our relationship with God, who is the source of perfect love, peace, and joy. And when we root our identity and our satisfaction in Him, we can bring a whole and secure self into our relationship, which allows us to grow and flourish without the weight of these unrealistic expectations. because it's so important to remember that your significant other cannot take the place of God in your life. They are a gift from the Lord, but they are not a savior. When you put God first and seek him above all else, your relationship becomes a reflection of his love and not a substitute for it. So this frees both you and your partner up to love each other with grace and patience. That's an outflow of your relationship with God. So it's similar to my first piece of advice, but we're tying it all together as my last. Because by finding your satisfaction in God, that's where you will set the foundation for a Christ-centered relationship, one where you can walk together in faith in building a relationship that's not dependent on each other's perfection, but is dependent on God's endless grace and love.
And this is exactly where I was at before finally taking a time of singleness before being with my now husband. I was trying to fill a God-sized hole with a man or a boy, and it wasn't working. And once I finally realized and learned how to fill that hole with the Lord, I was able to have love overflowing for an actual earthly relationship. So definitely great advice. My last piece of advice is very practical. We're going the practical route. And this might even seem very old-fashioned, but I stand by it. Do not kiss until you're engaged. And obviously, this is not a piece of advice that's like hard in the sand, like God says in his word. Like he doesn't say don't kiss until you're engaged. But let me tell you, this was one of the best decisions that I ever made. Choosing not to kiss while dating wasn't just about drawing a line physically. It was about creating the emotional and spiritual space to make a clear, unclouded decision about my future. And by holding off physical intimacy, I gave myself the clarity that I needed to know without a doubt that I was ready to marry my husband, even though we only officially dated for a few months. So it seemed crazy to a lot of people that I was ready to make that decision. But because we had viewed our relationship in a sacred way and held off on that intimacy, my head was very clear and I felt very confident in that decision. And here's the thing. I knew that I was attracted to him. People are like, oh, you need to test out and see if like you're actually physically like, no, like I knew I was attracted to him. Like, trust me, I wanted to kiss him, but I just knew that kissing was an intimate action that could stir up emotions and desires that might cloud my judgment. And by not kissing, I was able to remove the distractions and focus on what really mattered, which was understanding if he was the right person for me spiritually, emotionally, and practically for the long term. And when you choose to save physical intimacy for marriage, you're walking in God's design, which gives you peace, and you're setting yourself up to make a decision based on more than just physical attraction. You're prioritizing the foundation of your relationship. And here's the best part. Now that we're married, like I have a lifetime of kissing him. Like I can kiss him whenever I want. Like that's great. And we have a lifetime of physical connection. And that is God honoring now that we're in a covenant marriage. So that first kiss came right after I said yes to marrying him, when I knew with confidence that we were stepping into a lifelong commitment together. And that was just a beautiful moment. So not only is it great, like for your marriage, to build that foundation, but it also makes for like a great engagement, like something you get to look forward to. And I was like nervous for engagement, like most girls are, but like also just more nervous about that first kiss. But it was like those jittery, happy feelings that we associate with relationships, but they were in the bounds of God's design. It was amazing. So that is my last piece of advice. It's very practical, very tangible, which I know girls like sometimes. So there you go. There you have it.
No, I love that piece of advice. And Matt and I kissed like in the beginning of our relationship, and then we said no, especially when we like had left the academy and we had separate apartments. But if we were hanging out, a lot of times we'd be at each other's. He had a roommate and I didn't. So it was a good boundary for us that really helped us pursue purity. And I feel like it got a lot easier to be pure when we stopped kissing. And I wish we wouldn't have kissed the whole time, so we had a better story like you guys. But
well, because that's another thing. Like you can always like loosen the boundaries if you realize that they're too strict, but it's a lot harder to go back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it does work. The no kissing thing, if you're struggling with purity, I mean, it is harder if you don't set it up beforehand. But don't fear if you haven't set it up beforehand. But yeah, it's definitely easier. But it definitely helped our marriage, and it does seem super extreme. But it's like, why would you want to get close to that line? Like, you should just stay as far away from crossing that line as you can. And I feel like kissing for us is like what would open the door to cross that line. So it's much easier when we ran away from it.
Yeah, and if most people are honest with themselves, then like I would say that they would agree. Like kissing, especially if you kiss with your mouth open, like it's just gonna lead to other things. I'm getting super practical here, but that's just how it is. And another thing, throughout the entire dating process, you should be thinking about your future husband, period, even if it's not the person that you're currently dating. Like, even if you realize in a year, in 6 months that, okay, you're going to break up, like, you want to have your future husband in mind, and you want to think about the person you're dating. You want to think about their future wife when you're doing things, when you're making these decisions. Like, no, I don't want to kiss this guy if he's not my husband. So let me wait and find out for sure if he is my husband. Like, I want to honor whoever is going to be my husband if this person's not, by saving these intimate things. Like, I don't, like, who cares, like, how many people you've kissed? Like, that should not be a indicator of, like, a cool person if they've kissed a lot of girls. Like, that's just, like, no. So we're getting away from that.
Yeah, we are. Didn't you have one more, like, bonus piece of advice?
Oh my gosh, yeah, when I was thinking about advice, I was like, well, I could do, like, I could name off, like, a billion things, all from experiences of, like, doing it wrong. But one funny thing that my husband brought up when we were talking about this was, don't go to Disney World on your honeymoon. And it sounds hilarious, and like, why does it matter? But like, when you think about it, like, the reason that my husband brought this up was because our honeymoon, I got sick. Like, we were in the hot sun waiting in lines for hours. Like, we didn't have rest time together. Like, it just, like, the point of this piece of advice is to be intentional about how you spend your time. And the honeymoon is just not a time to go and do a bunch of activities. It's for, like, establishing the unity in marriage. Like, it's your first week married. You have to learn how to not only be intimate, but you have to learn how to live with one another. Because we also believe that, like, you shouldn't live with your husband or your boyfriend or whatever before you're married. You should definitely live with your husband, but don't live with your boyfriend before you get married. And so you're learning how to do those things, like spending 24/7 with someone. You're going to be a different person than you are when you're just going on dates. So anyway, it's a funny piece of advice, but very practical. Choose a honeymoon location that's going to allow you to rest and just enjoy the time together, and not give you a bunch of things that you have to do throughout the day. Like, yeah, Disney World could be fun, but like, it's not the place for a honeymoon. Just throwing that out there.
You could do it later, maybe like a first-year anniversary. We did an all-inclusive resort, which I highly recommend, because we just kind of got our food handed to us. We just hung out for a whole week. It's like in the Bible, because I think in the Bible they're supposed to, like, quit their job, or they had like a year off of work and stuff and just hung out with each other. So it's like, you get that for a week. But if you're able to, we went to Mexico and it wasn't that expensive, but it was nice because the food was great. We could just order room service whenever we wanted, and we honestly just sat by the pool or the beach. So it was great, and we worked out because we like to work out.
I think my honeymoon just calls for a redo. Like, that's where I'm gonna stand on it. Like, that just means we have to, like, do something like that again. Like,
yeah, your 5-year go. Matt and I want to go back to the resort. Like, it was amazing on our 5-year. Just go. And you're in DC, so you can fly, like, anywhere pretty much. So, do a little, I don't know, vacation.
Yeah, we'll have to, maybe we'll do a future baby moon and call it like a redo honeymoon sometime.
Yeah, that's what you need.
Anyway, that's our advice for you, our top 10 pieces of dating advice. If you're in the single season, we are glad that you're here, and we have more advice coming your way, and we're hoping to bring on guests that can speak to that specific season. We've both been there, and we've both learned both good and bad ways to walk out your singleness and how that translates to a good and fruitful marriage.
Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you found this advice helpful in any way. If you want to stay connected with us, you can follow us on Instagram. All of our links will be linked down below. Leave us a review if it's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or subscribe and comment if you're watching this on YouTube. And let us know if you have any episode ideas you want to see. You can email us too. I'll have our email down below. That way we can create future episodes that you're excited to listen to. With that, we're Erin and Liz, helping you mind your mission in relationships.